Won't be too long. We'll get through it. Tomorrow will be the fun. Yeah.
I think I'm on. Am I on now? Is it on? Excellent.
We'll start with 1 minute, gentlemen.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Maybe some group projects and classrooms or, getting to know folks. That's what you got to do. Whatever it is, if you want extra credit, just come to us. We know you got things on your mind because Lord knows when we ask you for your opinion, you love to share it. So why don't you just tell us face to face? Oh, I don't want to ask any questions. That's on you. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for being here. Luckily for you all, I will only talk for about 30 seconds and turn it over to our colleagues from Baskervill. My name is Jose Villalba. I am Vice President and Special Advisor to Dr. Wente, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to really what is the culmination of phase 1 of this memorial project. We've been talking about the project, and we've been meeting with students, faculty, staff, alums for the better part of 3 years, and leading that way is the Baskervill firm out of Richmond, Virginia. Their corporate motto is to ask, listen, and create. And as a professor of counseling, which is what brought me to Wake First, I can't tell you how much I appreciate a corporation, a company, a group of people for whom ask, listen, and create is how they get to design such beautiful buildings as the one that they'll talk about, or artifacts as the one that they'll talk about today. So Sunny Joy Hogg and Patrick Thompson are really the stars of today's show. We will go for about 40 minutes, and at 4:45, we will stop the presentation here, and we will walk the short 2-minute walk to Lot S, which is where the memorial will be placed once construction is underway and once it is finished. And so we wanted the proximity to the admissions office to not only be figurative, but also literal. And so we wanted to make sure that we would start to frame this memorial as one of the doors to our institution. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it to Sunny, who I've known for 3 years, and then he'll hand it to Patrick, who I've known for 33 minutes.
Thank you, Jose. Can y'all hear me okay? Okay, because I don't need the mic to be too loud. I can project a little bit. As Jose said, I'm Sunny Joy Hogg. I'm with Baskervill and a part of the cultural studio, a mixed-use studio. With the cultural studio, I'm part of the co-curator for our engagement sessions. And who you don't see here, some of you have seen before, who is not here with us today is Bert Pinnock, our principal in charge for there. He has stepped away for a little bit right now. He'll be rejoining us soon, but we certainly send his love and appreciation here. We've been more than blessed to be a part of this experience and to help have the conversations to get us to this point that we are here today, which I will give some brief discussion about, or a brief overview of what we did and how we got here today. But I'll let Patrick introduce himself first, and then we'll continue.
Thank you so much, Sonny. So, my name is Patrick Thompson. I'm the cultural studio director. Bert is my direct supervisor, and I appreciate Sonny kind of elaborating a little bit more about what's going on with him. It's a personal family matter, and he stepped away, but we want to hold it down in his stead, and we love Bert so much. And I just want to thank you guys for all coming. Students, faculty, staff, anybody associated with the Wake Forest community, all of that. Thank you for being here. Sonny and I, when we were driving down, Sonny was telling me his passion, and I agree. Like, the whole point of this is to tell a story, to tell the stories of the history and what's been going on throughout our country for hundreds of years. And the fact that Wake Forest is working with us to do this is powerful and amazing, and it's really exciting. So I'm glad to be here, glad to share a little bit more about our design and where we're going with this, and I can turn it back over to Sonny.
All right. So today we're going to share the final concept, if you will, of the culmination of all the engagement sessions that we had the last year and a half, 2 years, where we met with numerous groups. Some of you have been at some of those sessions. Some of you are new here. We met with faculty, staff. We met with students. We met with community leaders. We met with community members. We also took the time to go over to Wake Forest town, and we met with descendants of the town, descendants of the history that before Wake Forest came over here to Winston-Salem. And we spent a good 2 years really gaining all the insights that we could from delivering this history and unveiling this history to the community, to the students, to faculty. During those sessions, we presented the history of the 16 enslaved that were brought over, the initial 16, but then elaborated further into the history of Wake Forest from when we got over to this campus here, and some of the current struggles that led all the way into, I think, some of the dates that we were showing of some examples of the history that hasn't been told, and those through lines still affecting some of the community as late as 2019 and to today. During those sessions, the goal of those sessions was, one, to just bring the history forward, right? Tell everybody why we're here and what the charge is of the university. And to acknowledge the fact that the history that is in a constant archival silence right now, to try and do our best to acknowledge what the past was and bring it more forward into today's time so that we can have continued conversations about those histories and those atrocities, and so that we can hope to heal as we continue to move forward. We had, I couldn't tell you the number of sessions we had, but we met with over 200 some different participants and culminated all of their words, all of those sessions into a engagement session document, which I think is available or will be available, where you can see the full breadth of those conversations. You'll find all of the information that we brought to you all and some of the things that we uncovered during those sessions. Learning, each session was a growing session where we learned more from local historians that have had different histories or have done different research to elaborate further into the conversations that we were having. After those engagement conversations, we took all that information, and what we do as designers and how we introduced those conversations was, this memorial is for you. And so what does this memorial need? What should it represent, and who should it speak to? And I'm gonna pull out my paper here for a second because I don't normally do this. I don't like to read off of anything, but the charges that this memorial, after those engagement sessions, and your words of what should this memorial do and what should it mean, I wanna make sure I read those so that everybody understands those. So the memorial should tell the honest story of Wake Forest's history with enslavement. It should relieve Black students, groups, staff, and faculty from the burden of educating others about the stories, the trauma of Wake Forest history with enslavement. It should celebrate, honor, and commemorate the lives and contributions of the enslaved people that were hired and or bequeathed to the university and sold for the benefit of Wake Forest. It should create meaningful connections between the historic town of Wake Forest and the campus. And it should place the memorial and artifact in a prominent, noticeable, and unavoidable location, taking into consideration the impact of student life and campus activities. So that last sentence we're gonna talk quite a bit about, because that is where we are here today, to review that selected site, to review some of those concepts, to review the concept on this, through this presentation, and to envision what it'll look like on that site. So before we go through those concepts, go through the final concept, I want to back up a second to say how we got to this final concept. So the words that I just read were the charge that were your words that were given to us about what this memorial should do. From there, as designers, what we did is we took those words and we said, well, now we got to make words into something real, something tangible, something people can speak to and see. So we took those words and created 5 concepts. And we then came back and had community sessions where we introduced those 5 concepts to the community. Of those, each of those 5 concepts had different elements with them. Some were in a location that was this, or some had this extravagant large element. I think, again, the report will show you all of these different concepts. I don't want to spend too much time on those right now. But in taking those and bringing those concepts back to the community, we then were told, then we had to refine it. So obviously with any revealing of new stuff, you had people that said, I love this one, throw that one away. Maybe can you combine this one with that one? Can we do this with that? And so that's where we land here today with our final concept, which was a combination of the main concept that really struck to many of you all was the amphitheater, which we'll speak more to, and then the Toguna as well. So we made a fusion of those concepts, which we will look at some of those renderings of the conceptual renderings. I make sure to say it like that because things don't always look this final, but we will work through that, and that's where we will move into phase 2, as Jose's mentioned. So if we want to go to the next slide. All right, so after all the 5 concepts were issued, and now we have now refining to a final one, we had come down to 2 final locations. Mind you, the other concepts prior to this, we were looking at multiple locations around the campus. We looked inside, we looked right on the main plaza, right under Waite Chapel. We looked at many different locations, and with the final concept being this amphitheater, the focus landed on the scale site and the Lot S, which we will see here shortly. After we worked with the committee to hone in on those 2 sites, the next question was, well, which one is the site? So if you go to the next site, this is where, as designers, we now have to do what we call test fitting. So we had to take this concept that we have refined a bit and put them on that site. We had to actually add some real rendering, some sun and some shadow, and actually do some studies about circulation, how do we access, what's the grade, to figure out what works, what doesn't work, what's something we're gonna have to bring in or change, or what are some of the things that we can work with. And in those, each design you can kind of see formulates a little bit of a different vision per those locations. As you see on the left side, which is our scales, selection, you see that there's less actual hardscape in there, right? We're trying to use the actual natural elements, the grass, the existing nature that's there, versus the Lot S site, you see much more of a hardscape element because we're going on what is now a open paved site. So we have an opportunity to bring in some more elements like that.
And a little bit is, you can see that kind of both sites kind of have similar programs. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this in the future, later in our presentation. You can see that we have like a memorial landscape, seating risers, an open stage, screen art wall, and then we also have this sculpture, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that too, the sculpture of the griot.
All right. So this is just the culmination of how we got to Lot S. We did, when we were reviewing both of the test fits, at this point now we're working with the committee to understand logistics, to understand where can we draw power, where is the best, most likely for utilities, and trying to understand what were some of the complications that would happen once you stick a shovel in the ground. So we had to really figure out and talk through some of those things, which we'll get more in depth when we move into phase 2. But before we could hone in on which site, we needed to know the overall issues of each. Ultimately, we landed with Lot S because of one of the opportunity that we have to reshape this landscape of this, what is now just a parking lot. It provides more opportunity for us to implement new design in this area that can be reworked and reimagined. So it's something that will impact the community because they have always known it as one thing, this parking lot that is something we just passed by, to all of a sudden there's this wonderful, amazing amphitheater with this screen wall. It will stop everything. It'll make people say, whoa, this is different. So that was one really important lesson. And thought in choosing this site. The other one being that last part of the sentence being unavoidable, being that this is right off the Welcome Center, the first stop for new students as they come in, as new people are coming to tour the campus. This opportunity for the university to integrate this into the tours, integrate it into education from the jump is something that we felt was a very strong opportunity for the university to lean on. Additionally, I think on the next side was the historic presentation connection.
Yes.
That I mentioned a bit of some of the concepts and Waite Chapel and wanting to figure out how do we acknowledge Waite Chapel. It's got a complex history about how maybe it was built, but also its importance of being an anchor point for the university. So it's not something we ever wanted to or ever should have thought to ignore, but how do we acknowledge Waite Chapel, acknowledge the history of Renolda Village, and then talk about how we move forward into the future. And so Lot S felt as if it became this fulcrum, this center point of where we can start to reintroduce the story and reteach and relearn how we need to do better as we move forward. I know you had some thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, definitely. So in our words here, we talk about the Waite Chapel, and we talk about how it's kind of an architectural reminder of Wake Forest's history. It not only stands for the academia and the faith that's behind the university, but then it also stands as an element that we all know in the 1800s that Wake Forest kind of used the elements of slavery and the institution of slavery in order to make sure the university could stay afloat during the Civil War. And there were certain men, women, and children that were sold for that benefit. So Renolda Village also is like any other southern estate, it's transformed over time. But, originally it was an estate, and it also kind of had that whole kind of racial divides, racial order, and the whole thing with systems of labor and power. But it's changed over time to be more commerce and a place of gathering. But the reason why this fulcrum is so important is that if someone comes to the town of Winston-Salem and takes that trip throughout Renolda Village to Waite Chapel, like, there's that acknowledgement that in order to take the trip from one to the other, this memorial will kind of be that part that kind of says, okay, this acknowledges everything that's happened in history from Wake Forest, moving from the town of Wake Forest here to Winston-Salem, and you can't experience that history without coming across this. It kind of creates that symbolic line of, hey, this is the break in that line, this is the fulcrum in that line. This tells the story of these people which were once forgotten, and now it's also an important story to kind of move things forward and complete our history. So this is the existing parking lot S, which we're going to walk and see here in a few minutes. Well, maybe not a few minutes, but soon. And this is our proposed memorial. This is our proposed memorial here. As you can see, it's facing right towards the corner here, and that's actually facing Waite Chapel. And you're going to see, and we have a rendering of that kind of shows the importance of being there and seeing the chapel steeple from afar. And I talked a little bit about the kind of program and parts of this. So a little bit of this is kind of having that screen wall, which kind of uses our Tuguna concept a bit. And we're going to show some renderings of this. Just know that the design is still in progress. It's all conceptual. We're working with the university and its partners to kind of come up with what images are going to be on that screen wall. But it's going to be part of what tells the story. And we have this sculpture next to it, which will be a sculpture of a griot. And a griot is a West African storyteller, oral historian, and basically it helps kind of preserve the culture. And it does that through memory and through stories. And so we, along with Wake Forest, felt like that was an important piece. Kind of when people come to this site, they see that statue, and it kind of is the beginning of telling the story of what happened at this memorial.
And some other things that, as we move into phase 2, we're getting into the logistics of things, and this is, fortunately, this is the third or fourth memorial that we've had the opportunity to engage with. And so some of the things that we bring here are some lessons learned that we've had in the others. And one of those being, how do we bring outside community members in and make them feel welcomed? And so Lot S really felt like a good opportunity for that because it's being right on the edge of campus. And what you'll notice too is that we've selectively on purpose kept part of that parking lot on purpose, because a conversation that constantly happens is how do we provide accessible paths and how do we provide accessible parking for areas and oftentimes in memorials that are very insular within universities that are only you can access via a walking direction. So this opportunity to be able to keep some of the existing infrastructure to maximize how we can utilize and experience this space is important. And if you jump back to the next slide real quick, what you can't really see and what we see here is the fact of that large grade change that is happening, which we will see when we go down there. But this parking lot, Patrick, correct me if I'm wrong, is at the top of the amphitheater. And we're creating that dark path that you see there that kind of enters down into the center. That's our accessible path that is creating the opportunity for an equal experience for everyone. And so it's some of the logistics, but it's also why we're here today. So I wanted to make sure we pointed that out.
So to add on to that as well, you can see that connection to the walking trail. So another reason why this site was so important, or why I think many of the faculty and the steering committee of Wake Forest was so into it, was because it's kind of that connection to nature. Like, we're using some of the natural kind of landscaping and trees, and it kind of provides like a berm and protection around the site. So not only is the site, it is noticeable for people who come, but then it's also protected and safe. And also, this slide here is talking, these are some some images kind of what we were trying to accomplish with the seating, as you can see there. And then also we want to use native landscaping as well. I think that's important to not introduce things that kind of don't fit in with the site and its history. All right, and here are finally the shots. This is a rendering from Wake Forest Drive. You can see the story wall. As I was saying before, the story wall is still in the design phase, so we're still working on it to work out the images and what it's going to show. This is the griot. Again, we eventually want to commission artists and put it out there for someone to kind of design this. And the trees right now that we're showing with the sentinels, so basically there were 16 people that were sold, men, women, and children that were sold by the university during the Civil War. And we want to have 16 trees kind of dispersed throughout the seating areas that kind of stand as sentinels. They kind of stand as a reminder to memorialize those people, but also stand watch over what happens in the space in the future. So those 16, we haven't analyzed exactly where they go. That's part of the in the weeds that we will, pun intended, that we will work with the university to select the trees to understand what those requirements are. That at this point, the renderings that you see are for conceptual atmosphere. Those are not any means the exact tree or how they work. And to be honest, they're not going to be that tall right when they go in. So mind you, you'll be looking at a much different landscape for probably 15 years until they grow. But that's the beauty of design, and it's the beauty of time. Another thing that we wanted to mention is everybody might not know what the griot is, but the griot from African culture is the storyteller, is the ancestor that holds all of the information and passes down those stories to the community, to the kids, for everything, because a lot of that was verbal history that has been passed down. So the griot isn't just a symbolic representation of this story wall, but also that introduction into who and what you will be learning when you enter this space. This is the only location for the griot, right? There's not one on the other side. This is the only one. Okay. All right, and here's the view towards Waite Chapel. As you can see the steeple in the background. Thought that was a very important backdrop as we talked about our symbolism in our fulcrum in the middle between this and Ronaldo Village. Obviously, you can see people kind of throughout the seating area, and this is kind of just a spatial idea of the view of the open stage, the screen wall, retaining wall, and the seating and the sentinel trees.
And the stage being unprogrammed is purposeful to allow for students, the community, to engage with it as they will. We've talked with numerous sessions with AFUBA and the past students and alumni about what are some of the things that they can use in this space, and the choir has eyed this as a great opportunity for them to be able to put on some of their concerts. We've talked with MPHC organizations and maybe some fraternity members and sorority members being able to capture this space, but the overall allowing the space to be used as intended for those users and keeping it open for that was the intent of leaving it unprogrammed as such.
All right. And here's just a view from the stage.
And speaking of specifics, again, those trees are full grown.
Yes. Yes.
And that stone, again, is also, it's diagrammatic, if you will. That's not, we haven't selected an actual stone, but we want to show the concept of stacked stone, creating those levels, those seating areas with the natural greenery within the space as well.
Yes, this is a conceptual rendering. Hit that again. And so this actually kind of ties into a little bit what Sonny was saying a few minutes ago. So the whole point is for the site to be visible, but then we also want it to be protected. And we feel like the berm, retaining wall, screen wall, the landscaping, it provides this kind of safe space for the site to operate in. But then it's also not hidden because the university, as stated before, like during tours, when prospective students and their families come to the campus, this is one of the first stops or one of the stops outside the visitor center. So it's a safe space for reflection and for people to, Black students to congregate in or any student to congregate in. But then it also is a visible space and is a monumental space on the university's campus.
I'm good.
All right.
Mm-hmm. This is the money shot.
All right. Here's a view from inside, so you can just kind of see what our thoughts are spatially.
And so some things you're seeing too, this is that flat portion that I mentioned there. We haven't fully figured out, I don't know if we fully figured out the accessible path all the way down to the bottom stage. That's part of our design process. But you can see this is part of that accessible path that we've come from behind the parking lot that is behind us over here and through the memorial, through the amphitheater to allow that access through. Again, those are lovely concepts for the ground. That is not necessarily the pattern that will be in there. We would like to think that everything in here will have meaning. Everything from the amphitheater wall that looks like a very just plain stacked stone. The stones that we pick will have meaning. They will have importance. We will work with historians. We will work with the university to understand what would have been here at that time and how do we use those elements, how do we use those natural, timeless elements to highlight this story within this space. And that is our rendering, yes.
Thank you.
So we said it would be quick. We still have more planned, but I think Jose has allowed some time for questions.
So first of all, hand please for Patrick and for Sonny.
Thank you.
Thank you both very much. I appreciate it. One of the things that you all should know is that this entire presentation is on the website. We have a website, memorialization.wfu.edu. And if you weren't able to read, and I don't know how any of you could have read any of the language or text that was on there, you can find it all in there. Sonny referenced the penultimate slide here as being your money shot. Mine is the one that explains the connection of that fulcrum between Waite Chapel and the village. And so I encourage you to take some time and read those 3 paragraphs because it really beautifully conceptualizes and captures the 200 different conversations and or surveys that were completed in order to get there. We have about 15 minutes before we transition from here to Lot S. And so as you've been thinking, as you've been reacting, as you've been reflecting on what you've seen over the last 25 minutes or so, what questions do you have? I will bring the microphone to you and you can ask, and Sonny or Patrick we'll answer them. And if they can't, I'll give it a whirl as well. So, any questions? Mary.
Shoot.
Okay. One's logistics that I'll get out of the way. This is my event planning background. Will this be built with power and sound system and those kinds of capabilities?
Yes and no. I don't know to the full. Yes, there will be.
Okay.
Like we have to, and code requires some of these things.
Sure, power, but I'm just thinking, as an event planner.
Yeah.
I'm just making sure, like if the choir wants to be there, are they going to be able to have 220 and
Yeah.
plug-in speakers and that sort of thing?
Yeah, that's
Sorry.
a good question. I don't know that we've.
It's very logistical.
Yeah, it's.
Well, anyway,
it's,
I just lay it out there. So
it's
you
a
don't
good
need
one
to talk
that
anymore
I
about
will say that we are open to looking into. It depends on what we can do. We haven't gotten into full where do we pull all power and all those things and how much power can we go to. And if it's a charge, like for example, in one of the past memorials that we did, the William and Mary Memorial, it has an amphitheater style in it. It has power, it has lighting, but it doesn't have it doesn't have speaker power. So at that, like they chose not to do that for ordinance and making sure that there's things about if there's just an open outlet, can anybody just come in and plug? Like, it's kind of those things to think through. So it's definitely something that we will need to consider, and we'll write it down right now, make it a mental note, and we'll make sure we ask is that something we should include in part of the final contract construction documents?
Awesome. The two other questions are in some ways kind of related with what Jose was just saying about that lining up from Waite Chapel to the memorial to Renault Gardens. I know that the original architectural planner of this campus lined up Waite Chapel to the Reynolds Building and then beyond to Pilot Mountain. Like that was the access. And I just think that's this beautiful thing of it's a nod to commerce with Reynolds the building, and then a nod to this ancient piloting mechanism, which is what Pilot Mountain was, that drew people like the Moravians here to begin with. And so that's, I'm asking about, like, have you thought about that point of connection? When you're talking about materials, I'm just thinking about the quartzite at Pilot Mountain and just whether there could be a nod to Pilot Mountain as this piloting entity. And then along with that is, other than the fact that obviously enslavement happened at the original campus. So when we're talking about enslavement, we can't help but mention that we were founded in another place. But is there also a physical nod, homage to the original campus, which is probably Tanya's question. So I just asked Tanya's question for her as well.
That's it. We'll work on it. Okay. We're working on it.
I was gonna say she answered the second part perfectly.
Make it happen.
Yeah. I will mention just on an aside on we did, Bert and I took time to go visit Wake Forest Town and spent a lot of time there and met with their community and met with the descendants. And while something on the campus would acknowledge what it is, I mean, the support and the education and all, the town wants that. The town wants that energy, wants that involvement. So I think where Wake Forest goes and how they navigate that, we leave that to the university right now. To your first point, do you have any thoughts on that?
I think you answered it perfectly.
The first point, her
Oh, the
first
first
question.
point. The fulcrum. How they intersect.
Our original layout.
Yeah, I mean, from what I know that we definitely have thought about Ronaldo Village and the Waite Chapel. I don't remember any discussions about Pilot Mountain, so I'm very intrigued in hearing more about that. Would definitely consider. I know you mentioned the word quartz, so we're definitely interested in possibly exploring that angle and looking more into this.
And it would be advantageous for the design. So, like I mentioned during the presentation, we learned as we were presenting too. So that is a new one for us. That is something that we would love to try and see if we can capitalize on. I don't know. I haven't engaged to know what their prices are or what their curation is and what that process would be like, and if we can integrate it into this design, if quantity-wise and all that. But if we have that opportunity, it's something that we will certainly explore.
Awesome. Thank you.
This is an exciting project, and I'm a 73 graduate of Wake Forest, so you know I'm just all into what you're doing here. Two questions. What's your timeline? And secondly, are you familiar with a gifted African-American artist who's a graduate of Wake Forest by the name of Quentin Huff? His family did a lot of work with stones and tiles, and he's a graphic artist who finished somewhere in the 80s. I don't remember exactly. But I wondered if he might be included in your outreach to gain some insight. And I think it would be special to have an African-American artist connected with the project who's
Certainly.
a graduate of Wake Forest.
Certainly. I have never heard that name personally. That said, we have an artist on our team who, I don't know, he knows like every artist. I don't know how, Ryan.
Quentin, Quentin, Huff.
Yeah, he's writing it down, and we will reach out, because that is actually how we want and would like to curate the story wall and the griot, is to use the university's connections with artists and the forgive me, I'm forgetting the program that you all have, where the art program where you guys go and
To New York?
the Reese collection. Yes, yes, and we learned when we were learning about that during the engagement sessions. I mean, Bert and I like fell over like, well, this is crazy. This is amazing. Why doesn't every other? And the fact that you allow for a class to curate and pick those was something that really intrigued us, and wanted to know how we could bring that opportunity to this memorial. That's phase 2 logistics, but we will keep that down. As for timeline. Who wants to take that?
I'm gonna let Jose say.
So my understanding, Professor Hopkins, is that it takes about 6 months to come up with the actual schematics that they would use, they being the designers would use, from topography to electrical to grading, and that's just the design process. So to go from that to things that an architect or a structural engineer could use is about a 6-month process. And then what I've also heard from you folks is that it basically takes 12 months from when those are done. And I've been using the Bobcat example because my dad was a heavy equipment operator. So from the time that they're done to the time when the Bobcat shows up and digs the first scoop of dirt to when it's done is 12 months. Now, sometimes it's 5, sometimes it's 7, sometimes it's 10, sometimes it's 14. I don't know, but it should be around that time. And the great thing about it is Sonny has been in contact with Chris Kewis, who's our vice president for facilities and real estate and planning. And I'm sorry if I butchered that. Thank you. So he and his team have been in conversations with these folks and the folks in RVA for a while. One other thing, since we've been talking about Baskerville, Sonny referenced the William and Mary Memorial. That is one of the memorials that put Baskerville on our map. You were on other people's maps for a long time. That's what put you all on our map. They just finished the memorial at Richmond called Burying Grounds. You all finished that last spring semester.
Yes.
And so if you wanted to get an idea of what the final product looks like, it won't look like that. And I'm sure you have renderings and 3D models that look different than Hearth at William and Mary and Burying Grounds at UR. But the reality is that's like, oh, if you want to see some of their work, that's where you can find it.
And then, I'm sorry, you can go to them, but as far as the timeline too, I wanted to mention that, and Bert has had many conversations with Jose, is that a lot of times when we come to this work, the university wants to make sure we do it now. Do it now is not always right. Is not always the right way. And we've impressed the fact that the importance of making sure the story and the voices that need to be heard have been heard and are included throughout the entire process. And Wake Forest has been phenomenal and patient to work through that properly. So I imagine the same thing will happen through the final CDs and into the construction. And I think they have taken the time that is necessary to make sure the right product is delivered.
Thank you.
What's up, brother?
How are you? Thank you all so much for being with us and your hard work. Just a question. Jose has mentioned Burying Ground at UR and Hearth at William and Mary. Is there a a conceptualization for naming thus far in terms of the concept, or is that in the process, and what does that look like?
Good question. I'm gonna let Patrick take that.
Yeah, I think naming is still in process right now. I don't think we want to just commit to anything quite yet. I think we want to hear not only the steering committee and the university's thoughts on it, but then the community's thoughts on it. We don't want to name it something and just get stuck in that.
Yeah.
So I think it's in conceptual design, just like our renderings and our documents are as of right now. So I do think that, we're going to be working through that over the rest of this year, and we'll have something. But when we do, we'll share it with everyone and get their thoughts.
And for example, the William and Mary Memorial Hearth went through, we worked with the committee, we worked with community members. And I remember working, it was one of the first jobs I did, and I remember maybe there was a list of maybe 10 to 15 different names, from the memorial at William and Mary, or William and Mary's Memorial, like so many different things, till at one point they were like, take William and Mary out of that name and just do, so those conversations have to happen, and they will happen through us working through phase 2 and making sure that the right people have the input so that the name is what the community wants it to be. Right now, we're just calling it amphitheater, but that's the, the in the office kind of filing.
So I'll add one last thing to Sean's response, and then I'll say we have time for one more question, and then we'll start walking over to Lot S. Sean, thank you for the question, because I think in a lot of ways, the name to the memorial, that process is probably similar to any of you who've ever written a paper or submitted a paper for publication for a professor. Sometimes the hardest thing to do is to write the title. The second hardest thing to do is to come up with the abstract. And so you have to go through that entire process, and then you get hooked on a title, and then you're like, oh my God, thank God I didn't name it that, because I named my paper something completely different, right? And so I think for us, it would be great in phase 2 to hear from the design team at Baskervill, and you've already given us that, right? Hearth was 15 things before it was Hearth, and that is going to be really important for us. And the last thing I'll say about this, Sean, is for a while, we used to refer to the memorials as the memorial to the enslaved. And then so quickly we heard from members of the community, students, faculty, staff, alums, members of Wake Forest College. Y'all better not call it that. What about unseen labor? What about unrecognized labor? What about Ronaldo? What about, and we were like, uh-oh. And so we have referred to it as the memorial. You call it the
Amphitheater.
We have referred to it as the memorial because it really provides as broad a representation as possible, particularly for those who haven't been recognized or haven't been acknowledged for their labor, seen and unseen. We have time for one more question or one more comment.
Just take one point.
Absolutely, and then we're going to walk, Chris.
Thank you, everybody. All right, oh, this thing is on. So I just want to talk about going back to that timeline question, all right, is that the answers are completely right. I'm not trying to correct anything on that. About a 6-month, 12-month, 6-month design, 12-month construction, great. And we got to see as it goes, But I will say just an interesting aspect to it is that art and the wall, right? Beautiful idea, but we have to turn it into a beautiful physical thing. So how are we going to do that? I think we don't have the process nailed down yet, which is good. We want community involvement in coming up. What's that process? Do we want to have a competition? Do we want to know? We want to sole source the particular artist. Do we want to do, this hasn't been decided yet by the university.
Correct.
And so, and then when it comes to, if we go down that path, well, what if that artist needs this timeline for that? Well, we won't know until we get to that point in the process. So just saying, it's a very good timeline for the design and construction, but there is that beautiful aspect to it that really is hard to nail down a timeline at this point.
Yeah.
But we'll get to that over the next, I'm hoping even just a few months, but not yet.
To that point, 2 points to add to that real quick. If you've ever been to the Vietnam Memorial in Washington, D.C., the memorial is one thing, And then years later, sculptures, bronze sculptures, for example, to acknowledge the women who were the primary nursing and healthcare facilitators, that statue came up years later. That's one example. Another example is hearth. Early on, there were conceptual design for hearth that had, hearth or hearth? Hearth.
Hearth.
That had this beautiful metal piece that sat in the middle. That was not part of hearth for the first
wasn't.
year or two.
Yeah, the first year.
They ended up having to commission that. So to Bert's point, and this is really, really important, particularly around the art, I'm not saying that it's gonna go up without the screen art, and I'm not saying it's gonna go up without the griot. Those two things might be there. But for those of you that made the time today to come out here, when the Bobcat leaves, Professor Hopkins, and we have a site and the choir is gathering for homecoming 27 or 28 or whatever, if we don't have the griot sculpture, it doesn't mean that it's not ever coming.
Correct.
It just means that what became a priority was to make sure that we could welcome without having to worry about, well, we got to wait until we have
Yes.
time for all of
Yeah.
those things.
And that goes back to this university, that you all have been very patient. And I think that's the biggest takeaway that I've appreciated with working with you all. And not everyone is patient, and everybody wants to feel like they've done something. And the patience leads to a better long-term delivery. And so I think that's going to be the biggest thing.
So, let's walk for 2 minutes and we'll show you the site.